I am a theorist, and here we're talking about game theory, economic theory, systems theory, and evolutionary theory. And this is a theory channel. That's what I'm doing on this YouTube channel. So in this video, I would like to lay out my depiction of conspiracy, non-conspiracy thinking. And this is contending with the fact that oftentimes something that looks like a conspiracy from some place inside the system, when you zoom in, it's actually not a conspiracy. It's actually more of an emergent phenomenon among mostly good actors. And of course, the reverse can also be true. You can have things that do not look like a conspiracy from some vantage point in the system, but that in fact do involve some element of conspiracy. So I would like to lay out how I think about these things in this video. And to start with, we need to know what is a conspiracy, what exactly are we talking about here? And a conspiracy, I think, has four elements, where the first is bad actors or actors with some kind of nefarious content. Maybe that's just gaining power for themselves. Second, we need some kind of collusion among the different actors. Third, we need some element of secrecy, or else people would recognize that what's going on is not a valid thing to have happening. And finally, we need people acting from positions of power in society. That's a conspiracy. And my general approach here is going to be to build different models that are mutually incompatible, but that each bring a different type of insight about how the system's operating. So we actually will start out by saying, okay, what if an evil dictator were running this society, which of course is not the case. But if that were the case, what sort of game theory principles might emerge as we looked at it from that model's standpoint? And then we will also look at it from the standpoint of how could you get some of this really destructive behavior where you only have good actors acting within the system. So can we get a version of reality that is entirely emergent with only well-intentioned actors? And of course, that is also not an accurate depiction of reality, but it will give us so many insights if we go through the exercise of doing that, because actually most people in the system are not bad actors. And yet there are going to be some bad actors sprinkled throughout the system, and especially some bad actors who have worked their way into roles of power. And so having these different vantage points will sort of help us to think flexibly about how the system is working. And one depiction that I've already laid out is if you think of our system as being a hierarchical system, which is not exactly what it is, but that can be one helpful lens, where you have people who are at the bottom of that hierarchy where they don't have much power at all. Oftentimes when they look at what's happening from the top, it can look more like a conspiracy than it does from inside those top bubbles of people who actually sit closer to nodes of power. So if you zoom into people at the top, they look at the people around them and what's happening and the way decisions are getting made, and they're like, there's no conspiracy here. This is all good actors trying to manage a situation where we don't really have control over the system. We're just doing the best we can. And the thing is, both of those perspectives are wrong. There's things that cannot be understood from positions of power, because if you're going to work your way up inside this system, there are certain distortions of reality that you have to take into your worldview just to be able to operate in positions close to nodes of power. And yet, of course, people who are disempowered in the system or at the bottom of the hierarchy, those people can't actually see the real and dynamic human things going on in these different communities where personalities and charisma and different very subtle ways power acts in these communities is at play. It just sort of looks like one big blob of people in power from the vantage point of someone at the bottom of the hierarchy, which is not accurate. So there's information that can only be seen from different vantage points. Now, why is conspiracy, non-conspiracy thinking both worthwhile and even empowering? And the reason is I think this helps us to overcome this learned helplessness. where, of course, part of the story, or at least half the story there, is if your energy is focused on those people need to change, the problem in the system is those people, then that paralyzes everybody because everybody's pointing the finger at somebody else. But then also, a lot of times people figure out, wait a second, this isn't helping, I need to point the finger back at myself. What can I actually do? And that's good and important, and it's foundational actually, but it sort of focuses people on their own sphere of influence, which tends to be a smaller group around people. And for there to be actual healing in the system, that's not sufficient. There needs to be actual collaboration across the different layers of the system. And that kind of collaboration starts with the way we perceive each other and the way we perceive the dynamics in the game and the problem that each person at different layers in the system faces to actually heal things. So where am I going with this? First, I want to lay out why are different vantage points necessary, turning to this book, and then I want to lay out a step-by-step approach for how to think about conspiracy, non-conspiracy thinking. And finally, what is my orientation toward the two opposing camps of people on this topic, where one of these camps is people that the world might consider to be conspiracy theorists, and the other camp is people who oppose that group. To start with, I want to set up the importance of multiple vantage point thinking. And this does come from this book, and a good analogy he gives is the Japanese garden analogy, where oftentimes they will have these 15 stones that are placed strategically throughout the garden, such that there's no one vantage point in the garden where you can see all 15 stones. You have to walk around the garden to see all of these, to sort of cover the ground of these 15 important, meaningful stones. And reality is very much like that. If you want a depth of viewing reality, you do have to view it from different vantage points. And sometimes you have to get comfortable with the fact that actually something that might seem mutually incompatible or contradictory, those are both truths about reality that are just true from different vantage points. And let me give you another quote about anthills that exemplifies this. And the quote was quoted in this book, but it's by somebody else. It's by N.D. Thies. Ant colonies are a good example. From afar, the colony appears to be a solid, shifting, dark mass against the earth. But up close, one can discern individual ants and describe the colony as the emergent self-organization of those scurrying individuals. Moving in still closer, these individual ants dissolve into myriad cells. The cell as a definable unit exists only on a particular level of scale. Higher up, the scale has no observational validity. Lower down, the cell as an entity vanishes, having no independent existence. The cell as a thing depends on perspective and scale. Now you see it, now you don't, as a magician might say. And of course, if we're envisioning our system, there are going to be lots of different vantage points, whether you're close up and looking at the human dynamics that are interpersonal and have the character of the specific personalities with their quirks and their pet peeves and all that. That's really different than looking from a zoomed back perspective. And an understanding of the system cannot neglect any of these vantage points if you want a hold on what's really going on. Now let's turn to the step-by-step approach to conspiracy, non-conspiracy thinking. And usually this starts with some sort of observation about the way the system is behaving. And right now the system is doing a lot of things that are kind of destructive. So you observe something in the real world and you're like, what is going on with that? And the first step of conspiracy, non-conspiracy thinking is to allow yourself the pleasure of the evil dictator version of the story. And you should definitely give him a mustache, maybe with a curl at the end, make him a caricature, because of course you're reminding yourself that this is not reality. This is just a way of thinking about things that will help to bring out some of the game theory dynamics. And one of the videos I did a year ago now was an evil dictator version of a story that was capturing a dynamic we see all over the place. So that's a good example of that. The title of that video is Judo of Mass Frustration, and my hope is to do an emergent only good actors version of the same phenomenon at some point in the next few months. So that is a good way of sort of capturing the high-level strategic behavior that might be going on even if there is no specific strategic actor addressing it. Now, I want to point out that this is not a conspiracy version of the story. Our evil dictator version does not involve collusion, which is one of the 4 criteria of a conspiracy, because the evil dictator can just dictate. That's step 1. Step 2 is going to be to take the same evil dictator version of the story and to add a little bit of complexity and to acknowledge that even a dictator of a country relies on many people underneath him to do his will. So there's a video by another YouTuber called Rules for Rulers that does a great job of explaining how even highly hierarchical systems require the dictator to rely on people beneath him, and they require those people to rely on the people beneath them. So I'm not going to flesh this version out in this video. I'm just going to point you to that video and say that the second step of your conspiracy, non-conspiracy thinking might be, what would this dictator need to do if they needed to rely on more groups of people underneath them? And that could bring new game theory insights that you wouldn't get from the pure dictator version. Now, the third step here is really the centerpiece of conspiracy, non-conspiracy thinking, which is to build up a model of how this might work if there were only good, well-intentioned actors in the system, and if it was emergent. And I don't love the word emergent. Emergent means something that's sort of bubbling up from the bottom and creating a dynamic at a higher level that's not apparent from the bottom. The word is a little bit jargony and it's a little bit hand-wavy, but I don't have a better word to use, so the good actors emergent version is this third version. And this is absolutely the hardest version to come up with, but doing a good job of this version will definitely improve one's thinking about how systems are working, how these dynamics are playing out. And then the fourth step is going to be to take your model from the third step, this emergent good actors version, and sprinkle a few bad actors throughout that. So maybe these can be strategic actors who can act on communities of really well-intentioned people. And at that point, you ask the question, how could those bad actors use the communities of well-intentioned people to achieve their will? And how many of these bad actors are needed to turn the whole system into something that is not functioning well or that is quite destructive? Now, what do I mean by bad actor here? Because I don't actually believe in good people and bad people. It's really that Solzhenitsyn quote, "The battle line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man." I do believe that. But when we think about bad actors, we're thinking about a normal person who wrestles with temptations to do things that are selfish or that are hurtful to other people, and also more altruistic drives, that both of those act on everybody. The bad actors are really just people who have given in to those bad temptations over and over and over until they've become a habit. And we could also think of these bad actors as people who have who want power for power's sake. They're not trying to use power to do good in the world. They're trying to use power to amass more power to themselves. Or they could even be, although this sort of gets back into the good version of the person, someone who's trying to gain more power for their own social causes that are altruistic. It's just they're so blind to the social causes that are in opposition to their social cause that they're not able to see the destruction they're causing to other people. That would be another version of these bad actors. But yeah, the question in this third version is a few of those bad actors can do a lot of harm. Now, I'm not going to make the claim that you can just get rid of the bad actors and the system is fixed. I don't think that's true about the system, but we're just coming up with different ways of thinking about how this works. And of course, this sort of blindness relates to the banality of evil. And I did a video explaining that, going back to Hannah Arendt's book on a particular Nazi bureaucrat who basically just went about his work without thinking much about the bigger purpose that he was participating in, even though, of course, he would have had to have been aware. Yet I think in our system, oftentimes the people who are playing a bureaucratic or technocratic role, they're so focused on a community that has an aversion to an awareness of the negative side effects of that community's behavior, that it's almost a step beyond the banality of evil as she lays it out in that book. And then the fifth step here is going to be to take this model that we've built up by our fourth step and to look at things from different vantage points. What does it look like from the perspective of the evil actors sprinkled throughout the system doing their will? What does it look like from this perspective of these good, well-intentioned actors who are networked close to those evil actors and may not notice that actually that one person is trying to do something that's not in line with my values? What does it look like from that person's perspective? What does it look like from someone's perspective who's not in the in and in the know in those seats of power? So checking different vantage points with our fourth model, I think, is very helpful. And then our sixth step is to loosen up the definition of good actors and bad actors. And then our seventh step, our final step, is the actual conspiracy step, where we consider the possibility, what if we have some of these bad actors who recognize that working together and colluding could be to their advantage? That is a strategy they could take. And when you look at game theory oftentimes captures the dynamics where you have both competition and cooperation enmeshed together and working together. But these are not equal forces. Cooperation is way more powerful than competition, even though both need to be there in balance. And strategic actors of both the good and evil variety are going to recognize that actually I need to find people to work with me if I want to play this game. And that really is true whether the goal is to live out one's social values or to amass power. Both of those need to involve collaboration. And that's how this turns into actual conspiracy. But still, in coming up with this model, we still recognize it to be a model. We still recognize that this is not reality. It's just us trying to contend with different ways of looking at the possible causes for dynamics. Now, the supremacy of cooperation over competition is actually one of the reasons behind the power to the powerful dynamic in our system. Because, of course, it's easier to find people to cooperate with from higher layers of the system where you have more power and something to offer them in an exchange. In fact, there's going to be forces that will thwart cooperation at lower levels of the system. And this is one reason why people need to be aware of different dynamics in the system. They need to have a picture of the system in their head. Even if what they want to do is just work within their sphere of influence, they need to be aware of the dynamics that might thwart any efforts on the ground level. There's also a fragility to the evil actors colluding version of this, because any one of those actors could expose the others and potentially gain power for themselves by doing that. And of course, there are going to be some ways around this problem, but that fragility is inherent to the nature of conspiracy and needs to be considered when building up this version of our model. Now, what is my orientation toward people that the world would categorize as conspiracy theorists and people who are the opposite, who see the dangers in conspiracy theory thinking and sort of the opposition between these groups? And as you might imagine, I am basically trying to reconcile the two groups without getting rid of the conflict. And I actually do believe there would be people in both camps who are deep thinkers who would recognize in what I've said here, actually, yes, that's how I think. That's how my people think. That's not how those other people on the other side of this issue would think. And recognizing the diversity within each group, that there are deep thinkers and shallow thinkers in both groups, and that both groups are pointing to a real and valid danger in the other side's way of thinking. And we wouldn't want to lose that conflict. And yet sometimes too much energy goes into the conflict between these two things, as opposed to the reconciliation that I'm trying to lay out here. Now, what are the dangers in each of these ways of thinking? And if we turn to the conspiracy theorists, the overly simplistic version of that has the danger of directing adversarial energy at groups of people, some of whom need to be allies in this healing of our system. So by directing adversarial energy at the elites, or people in power, or rich people, or people in positions of political leadership or corporate leadership, by directing that adversarial energy at entire groups of people, you overlook the fact that when you zoom into those groups, there are going to be potential allies within those groups. And the potential collaboration across layers of the system can dissipate when that adversarial energy gets too strong and too crudely enforced. Because if you look at any group of people in power, those people recognize the paradox of power and the slippery nature of power, and they have to operate carefully within the actual social network that they're involved in. And that is a really difficult and tricky thing to do. Now, what's the danger in the other group, the people who think the conspiracy theory thinking is dangerous? The danger there is being too dismissive of real dynamics in the system that are actually quite destructive. So if you look at why is our system so blind, much of that goes back to people dismissing real aspects of the system that they are participating in. And of course, there are people in both camps who recognize the danger in their own type of thinking, who actually do think deeply about it. And those people need to be collaborating even while not giving up the critiques that need to be on the front of our minds. And this movement from the either-or thinking to the both-and thinking, where the both-and thinking does not get rid of the either-or, but rather encompasses it, that is going to be a really, really important paradigm shift for many, many people to make. And it does come from this book. I'm not going to give a quote or anything right now, but this is one of the amazing things about this book. I will give you a link to the playlist of all of the videos that I mentioned in this video. And as I add more to this list, as I add contributing videos, I will add to that playlist.